There are 339 books in the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, and I'm going to read all of them, and I mean every single last one of them. The Reading Challenge includes all of the books that Rory Gilmore read or talked about during the run of the highly popular mid-2000s TV series Gilmore Girls. Now, to put an additional spin on the challenge, I'm going to read the books in random order, so stay until the end of the video where we spin the wheel to find out what our next book in the challenge is going to be. Hi guys, and welcome back to the challenge. We have book 14 in the challenge today, and we have an absolute classic, an English classic from the 1815s, which is David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I believe this is my very first Dickens, although I might be forgetting a book, I'm not quite sure, but I guess it's my first Dickens. And you may have seen that there's not been a new review for 2 weeks. The main reason for that being that this book is quite thick. So this is almost 900 pages, and it took me quite a while to get through it, but we will get into that a little bit later on. So as always, please do let me know if any of you guys know where or when Rory Gilmore talked about this book in the series Gilmore Girls. Was she holding the book? Was she reading it? I would love to know. Please let me know in the comments below. So when we spun this book on the wheel, I was actually very excited. I was really looking forward to reading David Copperfield. I've heard of this book for a very long time, and I've had it always some kind in the back of my mind to at some point read. And I also knew that although it has some elements of basically a biography, an autobiography of Dickens, it was also a novel and a story, and usually I do quite well with these kind of books. However, as soon as I started reading it, I realized, oh, this one may not be for me. And reading this book and taking 2 weeks to actually finish David Copperfield, which although it is a thick book, it was quite long. I had to lay it down quite a few times and then restart again from a chapter because I forgot basically everything that happened because nothing did happen. And then I had to pick it up again and continue reading it. And I was thinking to myself, hey, this is one of the very top English classics. How come you're having such a hard time reading it? And it was not that it was too complicated or that, I don't know, it was too difficult of a concept to understand or that the vocabulary was too complex for me. It's just that it was very boring and not a lot of things happened in there, and I had a really hard time getting through the book and the story. And what worried me most about it is if you're looking at the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, there's actually quite a few of these old English classics in there. And just happened so that David Copperfield was basically the first one that we spun. And I am a little bit worried now about the other English classics in this challenge, because if they're gonna be as much of a pain to get through as this first one was for me, then I'm up for a very rough challenge. Yeah, so let's get into the book, I guess. So I'm not going to talk too much about the plot. Basically, it's a semi-autobiography of Charles Dickens himself. So the book is told from a first point of view from this David Copperfield. And David Copperfield, as far as I understand it, in his life has a lot of elements that come from Charles Dickens' own upbringing and own experience, but I'm unsure how much of it and which part of it is fiction, which part of it is directly from Charles Dickens' life. But in the end, you have this story of life of David Copperfield that starts from the very beginning, growing up in the English countryside, later on in his life, enduring everything from growing up, going to school, traveling around, meeting people, meeting love interests, getting married, and all these kind of events that happens in a typical life at that time, I guess. So David, in the beginning, he grows up in a very difficult household. His father passed away, I believe, a few weeks before his own birth, and then he is growing up with, basically in the beginning, with his mother, who is quite a naive young woman. Not sure if she's well educated or not, but she's like very timid and not very outspoken, and just very, I guess, submissive, you could say, especially towards men. There's also basically the housemaid helping to, take care of the house and helping to raise David, Mrs. Peggotty. And that's how they are in the first, I guess, few weeks or months in David's life. And at that time, they are taking very good care of David as the best as they can. And then soon on, after David is sent away to a visit on, I believe, Mrs. Peggotty's brother, staying there for a few days, he's coming back then. And then he is put in front of the reality that his mother remarried, and remarried to quite a horrible character, I would say. And then from that point on, David is very poorly treated in the household. And were it not for his mother, he would probably be sent away right away. But his mother is also not really pushing back on the treatment that he receives. So he's being hit, he is being humiliated, and he's just being treated very poorly, up to a situation where he just starts to pour out his rage while being mistreated, and bites his stepfather. And from that point on, he is being sent away to boarding school, and his life just takes that kind of path. And it's just getting, especially in the first part of the book, it's getting more and more miserable for David, which is also why it's so hard to get through these first chapters and through basically the first half of the book, because you're basically just reading about how horrible somebody's life is and how poorly he's being treated. And it's not fun to read. I understand that there's a lot of real life experiences from Charles Dickens in there. I understand that a lot of people growing up, especially in that time, went through that kind of maltreatment and through that kind of pain. But I don't feel entertained reading it. I don't need to read a novel or a story about that, because it just feels very painful to get through. I don't see the benefit in reading this kind of story for me personally. I have a few other notes I want to talk about. So one thing that was very difficult for me is the characters. There's so many characters in this book, and all of them feel fairly similar. So it's like although there's 900 pages in this book, there's very little character development, and a lot more of the words and of the writing is spent on describing the surroundings than on describing the characters and the persons, their kind of motives, their way of thinking, and what their basic motivations are. I understand that this is a little bit limited due to the book being told from the first point of view of David's eyes, but I would have liked some more character development to the point where these characters are a little bit more distinctive from each other. So for me, it was always very hard to remember, oh, who is this guy, who is that guy, who is this person. And I just kept mixing them up and then having to check, I don't know, a Wikipedia page on, oh, this is that person, this is that person. And it felt very confusing for me to read it, especially because I did lay the book down a few times just because I couldn't continue reading it anymore. So I had to pick up another book every now and then in between to kind of push myself, or find the joy in reading again, almost, I have to say. So I know this sounds horrible, but I just didn't find a lot of joy in reading David Copperfield. I'm sorry. So another thing that I touched on a little bit already, with these 900 pages, with very little, I would say, dialogue and character development. A lot of it is just David describing his life and his surroundings. And that made for a very slow, drawn out storyline where not much exciting is happening. So for me, looking back at this, I would feel like, well, this is just the story of life of somebody who hasn't had a very exciting life, I would say, just your average guy. And just there's not much happening here that, keeps you interested, that keeps you want to continue on reading. So for me, the story was a very weak part of this book. There's just nothing pushing the story forward. Nothing happened really. There's no stakes to it. It's just life experiences and that of a rather boring life, I would say. Which takes me on to the next topic. So I really didn't like that whole sadistic theme around that book about how everybody was treating David Copperfield, especially in the first half of the book. It felt very difficult to get through. I don't want to be reading about a boy or a mother being continuously mistreated, being hit, being humiliated by words, and just being made a fool of. That I don't find any joy in reading this kind of story tale. So for me, that was probably what made it the hardest to get through. All this violence and humiliation that came with the first part of the book. And again, I do understand that a lot of this is from life experiences, but being the case that there's also a part of fiction to this book. I would have hoped that that kind of fiction part to the book would have been able to make it a little bit more interesting and kind of soften the rougher parts and not so happy parts of this kind of book and experience. So for me, the balance was really off in this book. It did get a little bit better after the first part, after the first half of the book, but for me it was very difficult to finish this book. So let's get right into the rating. I'm sorry, but David Copperfield by Charles Dickens is a 2 out of 5 stars for me. I may get a lot of hate for that. I understand it's a very famous English classic, but I'm just reading a book. I'm just here to be entertained. I'm just here to, and enjoy myself, enjoy my time reading something. And I understand not everything has to be just entertaining. It can be about, gaining life experience and learning about how those times have been. But if I just wanted to do that, I could read a full-on biography, or I could, watch a documentary. I don't need to read something that is partly fiction. So for me, it was probably that part that maybe I also had kind of wrong expectations of this book going into it. I did not realize that there was such a large part of autobiography in this book. Charles Dickens or David Copperfield, whoever we are talking about, had such a rough upbringing. But for me, it was just not. It was not a book for me. I did not enjoy reading this, and I do hope future either Charles Dickens that I'm going to read in this challenge, or other English classics have a little bit more of a pep to the story, are a little bit faster paced and have a little bit more things happening to it. But please do educate me. What did you guys think of Charles Dickens' David Copperfield? What did you like about it? What do you think I may have missed or misunderstood about the story? What could make me enjoy these books a little bit more in the future? Please drop a comment below. I'm always open to, having my view corrected. But that's what I thought so far about David Copperfield. If you do like these reviews and if you do like the Rory Gilmore Girls Reading Challenge, please drop a like, please subscribe to the channel so that you can keep up with the future books in this challenge that I'm going to read. And that's basically what's left to do for today. So we are going to spin the wheel as always and select a book for next week. So hopefully this time it's going to be a shorter one that we can actually manage to finish in a week. Okay guys, so we have 325 books left in the challenge. Let's spin the wheel and see what we get for next week. 3, 2, 1, and go! I hope I'm gonna like this one. I really need something nice for this week. Let's see, what do we get? What do we get? Sophie's Choice by William Styron. I don't think this is a short one. I obviously have heard of Sophie's Choice. I have not read it. I believe there's also a movie. I have not seen that either. I believe it's another classic. I'm not quite sure if it's an English author or not. But anyway, we are going to see. So next week, let's talk about Sophie's Choice. So until then, have a good one. Bye guys.